What's up? I thought it would be helpful to talk about sin today. I have my trusty iPad here, so I'm going to be drawing some diagrams to help us understand it. Now, why? Well, because I think we have sometimes a surface level understanding of sin, and it might be better to understand some of the things that are happening beneath the surface. And if we up our game, if we up our understanding of it, then perhaps we can have a better way of dealing with it, a better way of approaching it, all of these things. So let's get started with just the letters A, B, and C. Ready? A, B, C. Now, A and B are people. There's person A, there's person B, and guess what? They have a strained relationship for some reason or another. Well, person A, as a result of this strained relationship, might be prone to going to habit or sin C as a way to diffuse some of the anxiousness, anxiety, the hurdles, the problems, the unresolved tension of the strained relationship between person A and person B. This could be parents. This could be you with a good friend. Could be you with a boss. Could be any number of types of relationships. But as a result, as I said, sometimes we go to C. And C is often something self-destructive. Okay? So, what we have to do is come to a better understanding. What is going on here? Okay? So, let's do that. We might be prone to thinking, okay, the best way to deal with this is then to give up C. It's like, well, that's true, but giving up C doesn't necessarily do away with the strained relationship between A and B. And what we're doing here is actually understanding sin or self-destructive behaviors and habits as a secondary thing rather than a primary. Does that make sense? For instance, let's say person A, has a difficult time with one of their parents that raised them. Let's say, for the sake of the story, person B was an alcoholic. And so here we have a child having a hard relationship with their alcoholic parent. As a result, the child, however their age might be, whatever their age might be, might go to C in order to help diffuse some of that issue. And often what happens is person A then might go to alcohol just the same as their alcoholic parent. And then it creates a new triangle like this in which other people are strained. But that goes to say, it doesn't necessarily help to shame or to blame or to accuse or to tell someone give up their alcoholism unless you also at the same time address the reason why they go to that as their primary way of self-medicating from the pain, the tension, the anxiety, the issues between person A and person B. Does that make sense? So let's do this. Let's also imagine this. Let's change the roles. There's you. There's God. And there's sin. Now, some people might approach thinking about faith and obviously the Christian theology in the sense that from the start, no matter what, you have a troubled, pained relationship with God. And as a result of that, some people don't realize that their formulation of talking about gospel, if it has that as the starting point, then that means the first thing that's happening is it's inducing tension, anxiety, frustration that's irreconcilable, that's incapable of being overdone or overcome. And so actually, that might lead someone to go to a self-destructive tendency to diffuse this frustrated relationship with the divine. See what I mean? And as a result, they will sneak off and on the side partake in this, quote, sin, self-destructive behavior, actually as a way of numbing the issue of being told you are not on good standing with God ever. And so therefore, what you have to do is get rid of this. Don't do that. And then finally, if you do that, then you'll have a healthy and good relationship between you and God. But you see, that makes your quality of your relationship between you and God dependent on whether or not you give up a sin or not. But the anxiety, the tension, the frustrated relationship was there from the start. It's like, I can't even do anything about it. Of course I'm imperfect. But that's what happens when sin is understood in light of being imperfect versus perfect. Now, let's think about it this way. Okay. We can say that this troubled relationship led to more and more of this. And so to have someone tell you you have to give up your sin in order to have a good relationship with God, it's like, well, it's kind of true, but even that way of phrasing it can lead you to have increased anxiety, a mindset where you have to constantly perform. That can lead to what's sometimes called a works righteousness. I've got to prove to God that I'm good in order to have a good relationship with God. But the New Testament talks about all of this very differently, especially in the book of Colossians, where it says, "For God has reconciled all things in heaven and on earth, everything, back to him." Which means the posture of God towards you, the posture of God towards humanity, has always been a resolute yes, no matter what. You may not be in good standing with God, but from God's perspective, God's always got a good standing with you. And that's why this direction here is always an unqualified, unconditional yes. And guess what? Since it is always an unconditional, unqualified, gracious decision to always say yes, all of a sudden, it begins a troubled relationship between us and our own sin, self-destructive habits. I don't need to go to these things to self-medicate, to numb. I don't have to go to these things in order to salve some frustration, anxiety, tension that I might feel I have between God, because guess what? There is unconditional, unqualified, full-scale, absolute, infinite yes and reconciliation directed from God towards humanity, even with all of its faults. And so here you can kind of see two different interpretations of gospel happening. One is something that starts with God saying no. And as a result of God constantly saying no to us, it creates within us a frustrated, tense relationship with sin and self-destructive habits. But this other understanding in which God has an unqualified, unconditional, infinite yes of reconciliation towards us, like I said, it creates a frustrated relationship with sin. And of course, we can take this even further. The question then becomes, what type of relationship is there between ourselves and one another? We always have to ask that question, because our understanding, our formulation of God influences the way that we understand and relate to other people. Do we have a frustrated relationship between others, which then can lead to us running to a sin from multiple angles, and maybe those are different sins? Or Is there a posture that we can try to have in which we try to live with an unqualified yes, to live out this reconciliation of all things already, to say, I recognize that you're not perfect, you recognize that I'm not perfect, but I'm still choosing to say yes. And as a result of that, that choice to say yes, that unconditional grace towards one another, can actually protect us from going to some self-destructive habit, such as chronic smoking, if we have that, or gambling, or some other thing. The reality is, it's not the giving up of sins that leads to freedom and grace. It's the acknowledgement that there's always been grace that lets us feel the ability to actually give up certain sins, to give up these self-destructive habits. So I hope this made sense. This is really nothing more than my trying to bring together how relationships between ourselves and our habits and God actually very much influence one another. And it really starts to highlight the way that we might talk about gospel and the way that we might understand Christian theology. If you want to think about this, it even challenges the way that we talk about Jesus on the cross. Who is appeasing who there? Who is on the cross giving unqualified, unconditional graciousness? It's God to humanity saying, I still choose to say yes to you, and that I recognize you don't even know the self-destructive habits that you are giving into. And so there's just grace. There's just grace. There's just grace. So this has been the ABCs of sin. I hope that you found it helpful. Okay. And I hope that in some ways it helps you to reconsider some of the ways in which you understand. If you're starting to give into a particular habit or sin, you might want to ask, what's the quality of your relationships around you? And what can you do to actually improve those relationships? Because that is the primary issue. And actually, often the sin is really the secondary. Okay? So thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this. Grace and peace.